The member for Mount Waverley.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. And I proudly rise today to speak on the Guardianship and Administration Bill of 2018. And this bill seeks to introduces an updated framework for guardians and administrators for adults with disabilities, and sets out the definition for decision-making capacity, including a presumption that a person has decision-making capacity unless otherwise shown, and recognising that someone has a decision-making capacity if they can make decisions with some support. This bill replaces the Guardian and Administration Act 1986, as other members have mentioned, which is obviously quite outdated now, 30-odd years later, and this framework update is sorely due. So, to put that into perspective, and I recall, unlike my colleague, the member from Bayswater or Bentley, who don't recall 1986, I recall it quite fondly. I was doing my HSC in 1986, and I had a lot more hair then, and probably in a mullet. Hawthorn won the grand final. I think Neighbours first aired on Channel 10. But it was the same time that people with disabilities or mental health issues were living in places like Kew Cottages or Larundel. And the Kane government at the time passed what was then a visionary act to move to de-establishing those institutions. And I think bringing the focus on people to be in our community and not shunned away from our community. I think we all think that would agree that there's no benefit in hiding people with disability away, that they are as valuable as the rest of us. And this bill enshrines that again to just reinforce our common humanity. Because as I think you said yourself, Acting Speaker, or one of my colleagues, it is how we treat those most vulnerable that defines us. So we strive to enable those people in our community to take agency in their lives regarding of any disability or mental impairment or mental health issue. And this bill ensures that there is a statutory recognition for supported decision-making, allowing an alternative for adults living with a disability from guardianship and administration. This alternative means there is less restriction on the autonomy of those who utilise supported decision-making through the appointment of a supportive guardian or supportive administrator. It takes the will and preferences of the represented person when guardians and administrators are making decisions on an adult with a disability's behalf. Now, it also updates the framework used by VCAT and will better improve appointments of guardians and administrators by VCAT and improving the participation of the person with a disability. And these are very complicated cases. I think by the time, especially with ageing parents, sometimes it all works smoothly and families work it out themselves, and sometimes they don't. And so it is quite important that we now put into law that the person involved must be considered for what abilities they do have, and not the fact that by having a disability they have no ability, because that's obviously not true. So this bill recognises the need to support those people with disability to be involved in the decision that affects their lives, and otherwise ensuring their will and preferences are utilised in when a guardian or administrator is making decisions on their behalf. Now, before the appointment of that guardian or administrator, VCAT must consider the decision-making capacity of the person with a disability and whether the person is capable of making a decision in a supported environment with the assistance of, as we said, the support support guardian or support administrator, and that's one of the new parts of this law. So once appointed, this guardian or administrator must consider the person's will and preferences, but can supersede these if the person would be at risk of harm. And I think that goes to the balance that this bill is providing, aiming to provide, that needs to be considered. The legislation both defines decision-making capacity as well as including the acknowledgement of supported decision-making capacity. Now, I consulted a good friend of mine, a community leader in Mount Waverley District, who is in the disability sector, and Greg Mail dedicates his time to the Wavlink neighbourhood house in our area and the local men's shed. Now, Wavlink is a great neighbourhood house in our area that looks after adults with disabilities and assists them in not only training, a place to spend their time during the days, but also in assisting them with independent living. And so as these adults get older, their parents get older. In many cases, their parents have done a lot of the caring, if not all, for all their lives. So the guardianship administration will come into play for these people, and I was quite happy to see that the bill does provide for the needs of the parent carers, and this bill recognises that decision-making capacity is different for every person and can fluctuate over time, as others have said. And decision-making capacity therefore needs to be assessed on an individual basis. So the bill offers a range of mechanisms to assist people, depending on their decision-making capacity, involving the person with disability in decisions that affect them. This is not to say that the role of parents and those in other relationships who are important to a person with a disability are ignored. The bill requires VCAT to consider these relationships when considering a guardianship and administration application. And there's a number of ways to do this. So ensuring that all people with a direct interest in the application are notified and have the opportunity to participate in the process. Considering how decisions are currently being made and whether they can continue to be made by informal means, such as occurs through supportive family and other relationship. And I have a good friend, Ross, who looks after his son, David, who is not too much younger than myself. And at this stage, they don't need to have any of these arrangements because it's all working fine. But it's good to know that should things change, VCAT must consider that. So determining whether a family member or friend could support the person to make their own decisions. And if a guardian or administrator is needed, determining who is suitable to be appointed to the role. Now, in making this decision, VCAT must take into account the desirability of preserving existing relationships, which again will give comfort to the person that they are representing, and rather than appointing a person with no such relationship, which seems to just make sense, but it's good to have it in law. So I also note that, and I'm running out of time, the men's shed that is in Mount Waverley does great work with our seniors, and as all men's sheds do, and work in social inclusion and mental health programs deliver great outcomes to the residents of all districts, but including mine. But no matter how much good they do, we all get older. And I remember when my grandfather, towards the end of his life, his mind started to leave before his body did. And it's a pretty tough time for a family, as I think others have said. It's very complicated. Now, luckily, it sort of worked out all right. It's not always doom and gloom. I can remember one day he wasn't really himself anymore, but he did turn up into the living room, thankfully with pants on, and he wanted to know where his shoes were. So my nan, who'd been married to him for about 60 years, said, oh, they're in Oakley, because they'd lived in Oakley for about 60 years. His comment to that was,
Member's time has expired.
Oakley's a big place.
Member for Mornington.